of them are so elderly that they're incapacitated in taking care of the land. And the younger generations have chosen to do something else. That's the modern world. You'd rather be a hairdresser or go work in the city. It's more exciting. You get a salary or something, compared to taking care of the land or becoming an artisan like your father, your grandfather, etc. So I hope what you're saying is true, but it would have to happen very quickly. Just two other quick remarks. One, it's not a new thing. I think that the foreigners have a different view and a more romanticized view of Italy than Italian. I was listening to your remarks, even. I remember reading the remarks by Burton Holmes, who had come back to Italy after maybe a 30 years absence, and he was really distressed by what he called the disturbing hand of progress. Okay, and he wrote that in 1924. Okay, so this is not something new. But I've thought about that a lot because actually progress should never be disturbing. Progress actually has a positive connotation. So even that term, but it's true, I think for we foreigners, I mean, we're more saddened by the disturbing hand of progress within Italy than the Italians, because of course if you're there, you have to make a living, you want the pride, you need a job, you need prosperity, etc. And the other thing that I would say is just my more philosophical view. I've been thinking over it the last few days, knowing that this panel was coming up, and I was trying to figure out how I would try to express the way I see Italy. And I see Italy as a good example of the ugly duckling story by Hans Christian Andersen. That's kind of henpecked and feeling so different and can't get its act together and is gawky. And really, it just doesn't know that it's a swan. And I think that hopefully, in some way, we can help reflect back to Italy that it is a swan, and it just needs to see itself that way. But the risk is that we foreigners tend to communicate about it in such a sort of over-the-top, romanticized way that Italians don't recognize themselves. And this is a fine line in making this film. I made it together with 3 Italians, and it was hard for us to get aligned, because when we're too woo, then they just consider us ridiculous, actually. So we need to find the way to reflect Italy's beauty back to them in a language that they understand.
Can I just ask you about progress? You're talking about progress, and I think this is really interesting, because you take as a given that progress is necessarily good. Now, I think one needs to define it more precisely than that in a way.
Well, no, the word progress, I think, has a positive, it's supposed to mean that it's positive change. I mean, I think if you look at the etymology of the word, it should be an improvement. So what we take as, what we call progress is often actually negative change, but we're calling it progress. And I think this goes back to what Fred was saying, that all these things are happening, but a lot of times they're impoverishments for the communities. I mean, they become more prosperous economically, but the quality of life actually deteriorates really seriously.
How would you answer that, Ivan?
I am kindly but massively in disagreement. What I'm hearing here is keep your country as it is while we go ahead. And you know what? We are sending our children to eat in those French chains, in those German chains in London, so that we keep a place without German chains and French chains, and we send our kids to study in London. Because that is the world. Why Italy should be different? This I don't understand. Why should people be craftsmen in Italy when people produce computers? I want to make computers in my country. Why should I stay in the past? For the sake of who? I'm in the government of my country, and I want to be Europe. I want to be Europe, because if one day we produce cheese in a way which was not good, because that included making very savory cheese, but that was unsafe for customers, I'm happy that Europe says, because we eat those cheese every day, you come once in a lifetime to eat our cheese and say it's good. But I think that Italians have the same right to eat healthy cheese as the rest of the world. So I don't want to be in the government of a country which is something that doesn't change. Because if people thought, as I heard today, there would be no Renaissance church in Rome. Because they would say, we have the Colosseum, let's not change it. No Renaissance. Because if you build churches, a Renaissance church next to the Colosseum, someone could say you're changing the environment. And we must change the environment. Because I think one of the responsibility of a leading class, of a leading team, is to leave a trace of the times we're living in the world. So if I go to Paris, I see the present. If I go to London, I see the footprint of the man and the mankind of this century. I wonder why one day an alien ship, a starship coming from another planet, landed in Italy. They would say that there was no one around in the 20th century, in the 21st century, because there were no architects. There was no one leaving the footprint of this time. Now, we want to be an integral part of the world. We are one of the the strongest democracy and the strongest economies in the world. And we must be part of the world. Of course, we have to keep the way we are, our culture. We want to produce the best food, the fashion, and everything. But we have to come to terms with globalization. There is no reason why Italy should be not impacted by the globalization that we all face all over the world. Why should
I have to interrupt you. Are you going to interrupt
I have
me?
to interrupt first. For starters, you didn't understand me about the cheese and the hygiene. The standards of Europe are lower than those of Italy, and Italy has been forced to reduce its quality to conform to that. And milks are being brought in from elsewhere to make cheeses that are not the real Italian cheeses. Italy produces 451 documented cheeses. Some have been outlawed because the European Union would not permit them. The quality of Italian cheese is higher than the average in Europe. Not England and the UK, which is fabulous cheese, but Italian cheese is fantastic. And not just cheese, I could go across many products. But another point that I really do have to make is, and I've believed this for a long time, I think globalization is killing Italy. And for Italy to try to adapt to globalization will make it even worse. Where I see Italy is the following. While China, at much reduced prices and labor cost and safety for Chinese workers, has become the factory of the world, making cheap, bad copies of Italian quality, including tomatoes now, that they export to Italy. What Italy has is sovereign knowledge and centuries of this knowledge, and Italy, in effect, has become the boutique for the world. And I don't see where Italy has to produce millions and millions and millions of copies of the same thing, when what Italy has is phenomenal aesthetic and taste. And the 20th century, Italy was one of the great contributors to art and progress. Italian cinema, magnificent. Italian opera did not stop. When you think of how opera moved forward in the 20th century, it moved forward in Italy. Not in the 21st for reasons I can explain to you, mostly because of Berlusconi's policy about arts funding. But Italy should not be required to be a mass producer of things. Italy should make enough things for the world that it does not pollute the world with it, does not create junk that is thrown away, but rather this Italian concept, which has always existed, that you buy and you make the best things. You know how to take care of them, keep them. The reason these things last for centuries is not because Italy is old, it's because they made things better. If you go back to Vitruvius, which is a long time ago, his belief was that everything had to have beauty, function, and durability. And you can see that in ancient Rome, you can see it in the Renaissance, you can see it in 20th century Italy. What happened with Berlusconi is that he tried to join the rest of the world and cheapen Italy so that beauty, durability, and function are not necessarily part of the Italian aesthetic now. And I think we need to reclaim that and teach it in the schools. Italian education has really declined. That's why the parents are sending their children abroad. So improve the knowledge of Italy, not just ancient Italy for Italians, not just teaching them Greek and Latin, which most Italians have been forced to learn, but teaching them the whole progress. So if I like the 19th century, you like the 15th century, and you like the 10th century, we all can draw and become specialists in that, and all of that together creates a collective knowledge that is quickly being sucked away. So, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, and Ivan, so I'm thinking, okay, in my definition, my attempt to define the difference between progress and change, I'm not saying I'm anti-change. I'm not saying that I'm, conservative. Italy has to stay exactly as it is because we foreigners want to see the pretty little things. I mean, of course, we're talking about a major, cultural heritage, and I would like to think, I mean, it's disappointing and it's depressing when you see cultural heritage that's not treated well. Now, but that in general, anything that's precious and beautiful, you'd like to see it treated well. Italy just happens to have so much that it's got this burden, really. But it's also an honor, it's a privilege, and I'm not against change. I think that Italy, if anything, has a role. It can be a beacon for thoughtful change. I mean, really around the world, including places like China. I mean, communities around the world struggle with modernization, with globalization, and how to strike a balance between development and conservation. Italy can become a leader in that. I mean, it's a struggle. Italy is struggling really with understanding how to manage its beauty, how to protect its beauty, how to safeguard it. It's too much. It's a glut almost. But then again, the ugly duckling can become a swan, and it's an opportunity, because if communities in Italy begin really thinking about this and grappling with it and making thoughtful decisions, then change does become progress, and they can show leadership on this front. They can show leadership in terms of sustainability on the environmental front. I mean, Italy has the most incredible countrysides imaginable that need to be protected. The townships themselves, so the professions. Okay, you say not everybody wants to be an artisan, but some people actually will, and before they're lost, actually, hopefully that will take place. So I think I'm not saying I'm anti-change. I'm saying that, of course, I think for all of us, it's just a more pleasant experience when you see places that you care about progress, rather than call something progress when it's actually disintegrating, the quality of the place and of the lives of the people who live there and visit there.
Yeah, actually, we find that, of course, on my side, I would never think of destroying what Italy is and represents. When I was living abroad, I was terribly homesick. And I knew that I could have a proper cappuccino only in my country. By the way, never drink a cappuccino after 11 in the morning, because this is completely out.
It's for foreigners.
Yes, exactly. That stops you as a foreigner.
Ivan is really pro-progress. Change.
But of course, I think we cannot think that Italy will not be impacted by the future. And we have to manage the future. If you don't manage processes, they will end up managing you. So I think that we have to accept that we are in a new world, that international communication has changed, the way in which we move around the planet has changed, that people will come in huge numbers because it's much easier to travel, for example. So I think we have to protect who we are and our culture, but on the other hand, we shouldn't be crystallized and like in a standstill. We are part of the world. We want to be I think we should be an active part of the world, and also be aware of the good things that we have done in the last few years, in the last few decades. So the arts that we produce, for example, I wouldn't be afraid of building new stuff in our cities. In Milan, it's very difficult for an architect to carry out a new process, because everyone is so concerned about conservation and making sure that things don't change. And I'm concerned that we don't have something witnessing that we were there in these years. So I think we have to find the right balance. on one hand, we have to make sure that we keep what we have and our identity, our culture, our history. But we should be aware that we are making history as we live. And this part of history is not different from the previous parts of history. So we shouldn't be, in a way, resting on our laurels. We shouldn't be thinking, you know what, we're Italy. We are an open-air museum, and this is it. We should be looking after, the way in which we produce. I agree with Fred that we are great at excellent products. There's no better car than a Ferrari. There's there's no better ham than a Parma ham. There's no better silk that is the silk that we produce on Lake Como. So where we can win the bet of globalization, the challenge of globalization, because there would be never a Chinese plant producing silk as our masters do that in Lake Como, or a ham which is produced, or a culatello